Borderlands 4 looks like the franchise is finally evolving beyond where it originally was, and I just want to break down where I think this thing is really stepping up, but I also want to talk about how this could be what Borderlands 3 should have been. I'm a longtime Borderlands fan. I love Borderlands 1 and 2. I played through them immensely, all the DLCs with my wife, and I really have not thought the game has come as far as it should go. The pre-sequel didn't feel that great. Borderlands 3 felt like a huge step back, and so what do I see in the Borderlands 4 latest trailer that I actually think is evidence that the game is evolving in a way that it should? Well, first and foremost, let's just talk about the graphics, because that is not necessarily a huge emphasis in Borderlands. It doesn't need to be crazy looking. It doesn't need to be photorealistic, but they are really owning their art style while also elevating the game's fidelity. There's better use of lighting, better use of textures, and I think that will really help a game like this. You want the gunplay to feel good. You want all of the different enemies and the loot to feel impactful, and part of what makes Borderlands is that the guns just look awesome, and when you increase fidelity and crispness and just that look of the weapons with texture and even just lighting, some of the settings almost reminded me a little bit of Cyberpunk with the use of lighting. I think it's a huge step up, which is related to the second thing that I think has really evolved, and that's the gunplay. Guns in Borderlands have always felt good, but in this, there's a bigger punch. There's a bigger sort of crunch to the way that the guns are shooting, and that's even related to another thing I noticed in the trailer is that enemy destruction. They're kind of busting apart, almost like gibbing the way that you might have remembered from old games like Rise of the Triad, just little individual pieces flying off. And I think that all kind of ties everything together to make the game feel more impactful and more punchy in the moment to moment. That's incredibly important in a looter shooter because you want the guns to feel like they're changing the flow of combat. And speaking of flow of combat, the other big thing that you might have noticed that I really think is a huge step up is the movement. They're giving you a lot more volition, a lot more speed, a lot more verticality, and that sort of goes hand in hand with all the other things I just outlined. And this is what I really want them to do because this feels like what Borderlands 3 should have been. They're getting back to basics and then elevating those basics. It's a game that's focused on guns. It's a game that's focused on chaos and, blowing up enemies and just shooting like crazy. Well, that's the basics of Borderlands, but they do seem to be elevating those basics. The other thing I really want to make sure that they don't do, I would really like to see them not do, is don't really reach with the story. The reason that Borderlands 1 and its DLCs worked and Borderlands 2 worked is the story was more mysterious or understated. You didn't really know what was going on with Tannis in Borderlands 1. You didn't really know what this vault was going to have. And yes, Handsome Jack's going to be hard to top, but even he, I think, was more of a sprinkling on the game than the main focus. And the main focus was the gameplay and the guns, okay? The other thing that they really need to not do this time around is don't build your end game for streamers, all right? You've got to build an end game that's built for the more common player, as well as you can have that hardcore end game for streamers as well, but it just turned into a nerfing, buffing mess and a pendulum swinging back and forth. And they really need to nail the loot pool because of that. You got to have a loot pool that's interesting. It can't just get narrow at the top where 2 or 3 guns matter. You got to have a lot more of that freedom, not just within the guns, but even within the player builds. And they keep saying in all the trailers, break free. Well, from what I can tell, it seems like Borderlands 4 is aiming to do just that. But those are just my thoughts. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss the live shows. That's an opportunity to discuss these things with me. And as always, if you like this video, please remember to hit like, share, and subscribe.